Got to turn on the recording. Okay, well, again, now it's on. All right, no big deal. So let's go on to the screen share for the smart attendance. So we go to American Foreign Policy. You can see that attendance, and we click on attendance, and here we are on week 6, and your smart attendance number is 631, 631, 631. So I go to chat and I type in 631 here, and there you go, 631. All right, so 631 is your smart attendance number, and let you enter that in. And so let me also see what else. I have some other things set up here for us to do into more interactive activity here in class. So let me ask you this question, right? Before you respond, let me open up the file and show you what I mean here. Yeah, so here you see Nancy Pelosi in last month in September, she went to Armenia. So there's a conflict. Well, I guess I can always show you these things. I can make sure that you can see this. So I screen share, go here, you can see the screen share. So fighting last week, the deadliest between the two countries since 2020 was initiated by the Azeris, Azerbaijanis. The Azeris, said Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, while also calling for a negotiated settlement. Now, of course, the Azeris have a different view about this conflict. But Nancy Pelosi is always focused on the next elections in a month's time from now. Speaker Nancy Pelosi expressed strong support for Armenia on Sunday and condemned the illegal and deadly attacks by Azerbaijan on its neighbor, openly taking sides in a dispute where American officials have been careful to mediate discreetly. So why is she doing this? Because she wants the Armenian lobby to be enthusiastically behind her and the Democrats in the upcoming elections in a month's time. At least in California, right? Even if they're not going to, if the focus is not on voting, I mean, the focus is on voting, but also getting donations from the Armenian lobby, that Armenians who have money will give money to the Democratic Party that can then be used elsewhere to support Democratic Party candidates for office for the US Congress or the US presidency in other places where there aren't many Armenians. I mean, that's a big focus of these different lobbies, that the Armenian lobby, the Israel lobby, that these individuals, you know, they're not, you just don't want, you don't want only just their votes, you want their money because you need the money to buy campaign time on television, on Facebook, on social media, and you know, to run a political campaign everywhere in the country. What else did Nancy Pelosi do? Traveling into a zone of international tension is not a new experience for Ms. Pelosi. This report says her itinerary this summer included Kyiv, Ukraine, as well as a visit to Taiwan, to which China responded with days of large-scale military exercises. So, yeah, I mean, U.S. presidency has primary responsibility by far for U.S. foreign policy, but the U.S. Congress and its officials can make a big impact. I mean, that was the response of China to Pelosi's visit to Taiwan to launch military exercises around Taiwan. So, of course, if you're interested in the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, everything's available on Wikipedia, of course. If you go to, you go to Wikipedia and you can find anything there. And so let me go ahead and, just show you what Nancy Pelosi is getting involved with, right? So, so here you see the Wikipedia entry. Let me screen share this. The Wikipedia entry for Nagorno-Karabakh, the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia over this territory and over this territory, which is separated from Azerbaijan by Armenian territory. These boundaries were drawn by Stalin and Lenin in the 1920s. The way Stalin and Lenin drew the borders between Russia and Ukraine in the 1920s. They did lots of border drawing in the old Russian Empire to serve different political objectives. One of which was to, basically to convince they had a number of different objectives in terms of how they drew these borders that they're fighting over today, like in Armenia and Azerbaijan, over this territory, Nagorno-Karabakh. Of course, the Armenians interpret it as being the latest conflict by the Azeris, who are cousins of the Turks, to exterminate the Christian Armenian population here, and going back to the genocide against the Armenians by the Ottoman Turkish Empire at the end of World War I. And so, you know, there was fighting that happened 2 years ago, and then it happened again. And so Nancy Pelosi goes to Armenia, involves herself there, knowing that, you know, ultimately she doesn't have the final say over U.S. foreign policy. Joe Biden does. So she's willing to do these things and basically, you know, claim that she's representing the interests of her constituencies, you know, the people of California. And, you know, she's just visiting, and she's allowed, you know, she's allowed to go visit wherever she wants to go visit, and to Taiwan or to Kyiv or to Armenia and Yerevan. And it causes political repercussions. So you can see that if you're interested to investigate further. And so then we go here to another. Let me see here. What else do I want to open up? Typically, as I said, right? Well, let me continue on with this discussion before I talk about something else here. But just a second here. I'm looking for the. I downloaded lots of things to show in class today, so you know I have too many things to show. Of course, but I'm trying to find, yeah, here's what it is, right? So my question to you is, okay, make sure I'm sharing the screen, share screen, just a second here, close that. So we go to share screen, and I show you this. So please respond to the following statement. U.S. foreign policy represents the will of the American people, because the U.S. political system, that is the black box that we've been talking about in class, is democratic. So let me see if I can do this let's see, I'm making the breakout rooms. So we have 14 people here, so I'll assign you to 3 different breakout rooms, and you see that you are assigned to these 3 different groups. So Lucille, Milo, Suing Park, Pak Chun Young are in group 1. Please join room 1. Han De Yong and Jennifer Yang and Junho Lee and Pang Shiho join room 2. And Blandine De Croix and Remy Tamin and Vladimir Kowalski and Im Che Yoon join room 3. So please join those groups. Blandine, Rami, Vladimir, and Im Che-yun, please join. Blandine, where are you, Blandine? Rami, where are you, Rami? Blandine, where are you, Blandine? So please come up to a decision as to where your groups are on those on that issue. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. That U.S. foreign policy represents the will of the American people, because the U.S. political system is democratic. Do you strongly agree, neutral, can't decide, disagree, or strongly disagree? So come up with so communicate with each other. I've assigned you to those groups, right? So communicate with each other, and let me see here, and come up with a group decision. And let me see here. So we have the breakout rooms. Let me see where you are in the breakout rooms. So can you hear me? Can you hear me? I don't think you can hear me, can you? Because you've joined the groups. So this is the Okay, Suming Park, are you ready to speak for group one?
Me?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
well,
I'm
okay,
ready.
I just want to check. So let me go to the other rooms and see if they're ready as well. And then I'll open up the, I'll close down the room. Junho Lee, are you ready to speak for room two? Junho Lee? Junho? 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 Junho Shi? 어디였어요? Oh, oh no! Junho Lee, Junho Shi, his mic doesn't work. Well, we're kind of screwed then. So then who's going to speak for you? Well, somebody else will speak for you for room two. So pick somebody. Are you sure it doesn't work? You can unmute. So let me flip a coin. So Lee Junho can't speak. Yang Chi-yoon is heads. And it is tails. Who's this? Hang Dae-yong and Pang Shi-ho is tails. So it is, yes, Pang Chi-ho. You will speak Pang Chi-ho for room two. Okay, Pang Chi-ho. Junho Lee, send your ideas to Pang Chi-ho. Vladimir, are you ready to speak? You ready to go, Vladimir?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll let me close the rooms. Okay, so for room one, let's see who's going to speak. So let me flip a coin and see heads. It's room one will speak first, and it is heads. So Sumin Park, what did your group decide? Where does group one fit on the scale of 1 to 5?
My group. Okay, sir. My group have decided about 2. We just agree with this statement.
Why?
And first of the US political system is democratic, and it is so democratic system that has to follow and support the American people's voice. And it's the main purpose and reason why the democratic exists. Like, for example, in the past time when Vietnam War happened, President sent it their troops as he wished and as the Congress wished because they thought it was for their national security. But in that time, they lied to their people because everyone know about, like now in these days, the incident what happened in Bay of Tonkin. And I have Bay of, like, I'm not really remember the exact name of that area, but anyway, but through that time, the Congress and the government have lied to their people because they thought it was for their national security. But after time passes, the people of the America have raised their voice for stop sending troops, and in the end, like people raise their voice, then Congress has to respond for this one. So because of the democratic system have worked, so they eventually stop their war. And I think it shows the influence of the citizens and foreign policy represent the will of Americans. And next, in the sometimes US make some mistakes, like as they have done in the Vietnam War and as they have done in past of the Iraq invasion. But America has a self-feedbacking system. Like they try to like make point about why this every foreign policy have gone wrong, like throughout the analyzing emotionally, rationally, and academically. And this self-feedback always makes the system works more better, and system makes and this thing makes the system to represent many people's voice like more than what they have been done to the past to get more to good ways. So I think US political system is representing the people and it continuously evolving to become more good system. So
Okay,
yeah.
there's no right or wrong answer, right? So we're just getting engaged in a dialogue and discussion. So my job is to try to challenge you because that's my job, right? And you know, of course, first off, I would doubt or deny that I would doubt very much that President Richard Nixon, who was president from 1960, well, January 1969 until September 1974, would deny that he lied, right? He would say that they didn't share information or they kept negotiations and activities secret for a while, but they deny that they lied. They would say that, although maybe they did, right? But then of course, if you say that if he lied, if he's such a bad person that he lied, how do we explain the fact that Richard Nixon, even after ordering the invasion of Cambodia from Vietnam, South Vietnam into Cambodia, that led to those Kent State riots, protests that led to Kent State students being killed, 4 of them being killed and 13 or some number being injured with bullets shot by the militia, the American National Guard, to put down the student protests against Nixon's unauthorized invasion of Cambodia in 1970. In 1972, Richard won re-election by a big majority, by a landslide against his Democratic opponent, the George McGovern, the supposed peace candidate of the Democratic Party, won just 1 state out of the 50 states in the US elections in November 1972. Richard Nixon won by a big majority, by a landslide. If he's such a bad, deceptive, deceiving political figure, why did he win re-election? I mean, you know, of course, the student protesters in Kent State and throughout the United States, so many different college campuses protesting, demonstrating, fighting with the police, being arrested. They did not believe that the will of the American people was a relevant or useful idea or concept for explaining the U.S. Behavior in Vietnam, which many of their leaders proclaimed as committing war crimes against humanity in Vietnam. Does Vladimir Putin represent the will of the Russian people today? Of course, you can say, well, Russia is not really a democratic political system. I mean, America, you know, they have elections all the time. I vote 3 times in US elections every year, 3 times, right? You know, so you can say, well, Putin is not really, that's not really democracy. So it's easy to say that Putin doesn't represent the will of the Russian people. I'm not saying there's an easy answer to these questions. It's also raising questions about what does this mean, the concept of the will of the South Korean people, or the will of the American people, or the will of the Russian people. What does that mean? What is that? Why is that used, and what kind of political purpose as a political weapon or political rhetorical technique in terms of persuading people, controlling people to use that kind of rhetoric and language, and does it work? And it works enough that even though American soldiers started killing some American college students at Kent State and Jackson, Mississippi. Also, there were some students killed, protests there. That Richard Nixon, as I said, 2 years later was able to, more than 2 years and 5 months later, was able to win in a tremendous landslide in November 1972. And then, of course, he resigned in 1974 because he was going to be impeached and found guilty on an impeachment trial if the trial had gone forward. But he resigned because he knew if he was impeached, that is put on trial, that he would be found guilty and removed. So he resigned before they started the impeachment trial, right? So we had 2 impeachment trials under Donald Trump for Donald Trump, right? 2 impeachment trials, one because he supposedly was, attempting to violate U.S. laws in trying to get Volodymyr Zelensky, the new president of Ukraine, to proclaim falsely the criminal evidence of criminal behavior by Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, when Hunter Biden was working for a gas company on a gas board of directors of a gas company in Ukraine, Bursa, I can't remember the name of the company. And then he was found not guilty. I mean, they didn't convict him by 2/3 majority of the U.S. Senate, so just he wasn't found guilty. He was just impeached, and he was impeached the second time after the November 2020 elections. I guess, well, how do you respond then? I mean, can we talk about the will of the American people? Can we talk about the will of the South Korean people? What does it mean to talk about the will of the American people, which we assume is what a democratic political system does? It expresses the will of the people. And does it? And if that's the case, why don't people, if that's true, then why do people also engage in other forms of political participation? Elections is just one form of political participation. There's protesting, there is contacting your representative and trying to pressure or lobby them. There is of course, more militant and violent forms of political participation, like participating in an insurrection or revolution. Those are all forms of political activity. Election is just one legal form, right? So let's then go to the second. Let's see who's else going to speak here. So we go back to the breakout rooms, and like I said, there's not a final answer to these questions, but politicians, presidents, prime ministers of France, of U.S., of South Korea, they always say the French people want this, or the American people demand that. What does that mean? And what political purpose does it mean to say that, right? And so heads is room 2. So let me, and tails is room 3. So let me flip a coin here. And it is tails. So we go to room 3, and that is Vladimir. What did your group decide, Vladimir?
Hello. So we decided to be neutral.
Neutral?
Yes. There are two arguments that lead us to take this position. On the one hand, we vote for one view, one strong opinion in foreign affairs. So during presidential election, we choose at least between like 2 types of policies. We cannot say that the Trump's opinion on foreign policies and Biden's one are the same, for instance. And on the other hand, however, it's true that day-to-day decisions exist. So people cannot be auditioned at every decision. So that's obviously the game of representative democracy. But I think that people are more aware of domestic affairs than foreign affairs. So the president has a huge discretion in foreign policy. For instance, the invasion of Cambodia by Nixon is one of the clues. So people only react. This war was not carried by people, so people re-established democracy by demonstrating. So in our opinion, it's true that the people choose guidelines on foreign policy, and president have to follow it if he wants to be reelected. But the guidelines are very wide, and so the president have a huge discretion.
Well, I think, again, my initial response is that the focus of American officials or French officials or Korean officials is to maintain control over the political system. And they do that within the framework of the regime that is in place. So the political system is supposed to be, in a democratic political system, is a system that relies on a minor level, relatively minor level, on coercion and fear to control people. During the Vietnam War, that level of coercion began to increase because there was increasing polarization between the anti-war protesters and the pro-government supporter majority of the population. What Richard Nixon called the silent majority, the people that don't protest, the people that go to work every day and pay their taxes and obey the laws of the United States and do not riot and protest and burn down government property, like those Kent State protesters burnt down the ROTC building. Supposedly somebody did. The ROTC building in Kent State was burned down the night before the May 4th, 1970 protest that led to the shootings there. They are the silent majority, Richard Nixon said, right? And they were the ones that elected him and supported him against those Kent State University student protesters, while the supporters and allies of Richard Nixon are calling those protesters spoiled, lazy, young people who are anti-American, who will not do their duty the way their fathers and grandfathers did their duty in World War I and World War II and in the Korean War to fight communism that's trying to take over the world. So the response of the regime was to increase the level of coercion. With the support of the so-called silent majority. As I told you, Nixon, he didn't just win, he blew away his opponent in 1972, George McGovern. And Nixon was good about appealing to, he knew he didn't speak for all Americans, because obviously a bunch of Americans were being shot and being attacked and arrested. But he was saying he spoke for the majority of the Americans, the silent majority. All right. I mean, I can try to show you a YouTube video that I used to show in other classes, right, where you see Richard Nixon speaking here, when he is condemning the protesters for undermining America's resolve in trying to demonstrate to the North Koreans that Americans support their president. So the North Koreans have to negotiate and come to an agreement with the Americans because the American people support the president, whereas the protesters are weakening the Americans' ability to negotiate in Paris with the North Vietnamese, because the North Vietnamese can see all of these college students rioting and protesting, saying the Americans are going to give in if we keep up the protests. So here you can see. I remember watching the speech on my television when I was a small child, and Nixon is speaking here.
The fate of Lyndon Johnson did haunt Richard Nixon. He felt he had to demonstrate that most Americans still supported him and that it would not benefit Hanoi to stall peace negotiations. Don't get rattled. Don't waver. Don't react, he told himself as he went to work on a speech to respond to the protests. Insisting on writing it himself, he distinguished his supporters, the forgotten Americans, from the vocal minority in the streets with a new catchphrase.
To you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. For the more divided we are at home, the less likely the enemy is to negotiate at Paris. Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat. Because let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
The protesters can do that, right? So this is the context for the U.S. Congress becoming a focus of opposition to the Nixon administration. And finally, I mean, the U.S. Congress moved to prepare to impeach Nixon, including with strong support from the Republicans within the Congress, because they thought that this person, Nixon, this administration is leading America to increasing polarization while engaging in illegal activity, in their view, and while, of course, also after expanding the war just 6 months, 7 months, well, 8 months later into Cambodia in 1970, spring 1970, after this speech, just several months after this speech, and the Congress made the decision that for the good of the American political system, that the American regime, that he has to go, even though, as I said, he won in 1972 by a landslide. So of course, there's lots of comparison between the behavior of the U.S. Congress in 1974, forcing Nixon to resign before he was impeached and was going to be found guilty and removed, and the performance of the U.S. Congress, which twice impeached Trump. They did go through the impeachment trial with Trump, but you require 67 senators to vote to convict, and they never came close to 67 senators. The closest they came was 57 in January 2021, after the January 6, 2021 riots attacking the U.S. Congress that Trump encouraged and helped, or at least encouraged, perhaps helped organize. They didn't get it wasn't even close. They were 10 senators short. And that reflects the polarization of American public opinion more strongly, maybe even than the time during Vietnam, right? That there are strong supporters of Trump because they see him as the candidate that rejects globalization and American benign hegemony and all the costs and consequences for American society of this American so-called benign hegemony, including opening up the American economy to imports and allowing United States to bring in refugees from other parts of the world and so on. So let's go to the next group. And the next group is group 2. So Pang Shiho, what did your group decide on this scale? Pang Shiho?
Our team decide the neutral because U.S. foreign policy represents the will of the American people, because the U.S. political system is democratic. People vote for politicians who decide the foreign policy. However, U.S. foreign policy does not always represent American people. And someone said that even if the U.S. foreign policy reflects the opinion of U.S. citizens, it is not necessarily because of the democratic system. So our team had to decide the neutral side.
Okay. So you accept that there are different forms of political participation that are acceptable and in fact legal and ethical and moral, although people may disagree with you. Like, for example, right, the civil rights movement of the 1950s in the United States seem to have legitimated this notion of what's called civil disobedience, that you break unjust laws, you engage in technically illegal action to achieve a higher moral ethical objective. Like, for example, ending, in the case of the civil rights movement in the United States, the segregation and Jim Crow. Those of you who are in the American history class, we've been talking about that. Or protesting against America's unjust wars in Vietnam and expansion of the war into Cambodia in 1970, including, for example, what they call direct action, which might range from simply, for example, blocking roads and stopping traffic, which is technically illegal, but you're saying you need to do it because we have to stop these terrible policies that, of course, in the claim of some, are violating, international human rights law, international law, or extending, as I mentioned, to more direct and more violent actions like, insurrection, or the people that engaged in that insurrection in the United States on January 6, 2021, they believed that what they were doing was ethically right and correct. They believed Donald Trump, that the election was stolen. Maybe they're fools, maybe they're dumb, I don't know, but they believed it. They believed that what they were doing was the ethical, moral, right thing to do. So you can see why some people say you should follow the law, because that was illegal, because we all disagree. Typically, people engaged in political conflict typically believe that their position is the ethically right and morally correct one. it's not typically, people are not typically so cynical that they're just engaged in political behavior because they want to get wealthy and get rich. They want material benefits. That often happens, but particularly when you're protesting and you're willing to engage in direct action, civil disobedience, even violence, you believe that what you're doing is right. And reconciling those conflicts or those conflicting views is the response of congressmen, of people like Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader of the Senate Republicans in the U.S. Senate. He says you cannot get agreement on what is morally, ethically right or wrong in the United States. What you can do is you can determine what is the correct thing to do by the outcome of elections. If Americans believe that for example, since we're focused on foreign policy, should the U.S. provide military aid to Ukraine or not? Other Americans say, no, this is none of our business. We don't want to be involved. We want the money to stay here in the United States. Why are we giving this money to the Ukrainians? What does that happen? And they believe that that's intensely true. And then there are other people say, no, we have to be involved in that. It's for the well-being and protection ultimately of the United States, as well as the democratic systems around the world. And it's very important. We have to do it. Who's right? Who is correct? You can try to convince each other and engage in debate and dialogue, but ultimately the final determiner of the outcome of these debates has to be elections. And Mitch McConnell, he gets reelected, and getting reelected is the proof that the American people overall have decided that you as a senator, as a member of the House of Representatives in the US Congress, as the president, are doing an acceptable job when confronted with the alternative of somebody else to elect. That you are custodian, you are given this responsibility to interpret the will of the American people, then to express the will of the American people, and then to implement the will of the American people in foreign policy and also in domestic policy. And if you are not doing a good enough job, you're thrown out in the next election. So, that's one response, right? That, and if of course, when we talk about the Israel lobby or the Armenian lobby or the Taiwan lobby, if somebody who's defending the rights of the Palestinians, for example, against the Israelis who get all of this economic and military aid from the United States as Israel expands its control and settlements in the West Bank, in the occupied Palestinian territories, and people defend and complain and condemn the United States for supporting Israel and giving Israel the power capabilities to engage in such policies, what's the response from those people who support Israel? Well, who's stopping the Palestinian Americans and the Arab Americans and the Muslim Americans and from organizing and mobilizing and pressuring the U.S. Congress for their positions, for what they want? Why are people like me and others criticizing the Israel lobby for being so effective? They're just engaged in democratic politics, right? We like democracy. It's in the U.S. Constitution. It's the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights that American people have the right to assemble and to and lobby their elected officials. The language is to appeal for redress of grievances. That's old language for saying to lobby. That's in the Constitution. So why are you criticizing Jewish Americans for being so effective at engaging in democratic political and politics? Is it because you're anti-Semitic? That somehow Jews are kept evaluated according to a different criteria than other people because they're Jews? That's what they say, right? That there's elements of anti-Semitism here, that Jewish Americans who are lobbying the U.S. government and pressuring the U.S. Congress and the U.S. executive branch to defend Israel, that they're somehow being condemned because they're so good at engaged in liberal democratic politics that we applaud. We think it's great that people should participate in politics, that they be actively engaged and attentive to political affairs. We say that's a good thing, but if Jews do it for Israel, oh, that's bad. What's stopping the Palestinians Americans and the Arab Americans and the Muslim Americans from forming their own lobby groups? And go ahead, do it. But they don't, or they don't do it as effectively as the Israel lobby. Who's right? Who's ethical? Who can determine that? I mean, Amnesty International, the big human rights, transnational lobby group for human rights, they have officially declared that what Israel is doing in the occupied Palestinian territories is a form of apartheid. And but of course, the Israeli supporters and Israeli government say, no, you're holding Israel to a separate standard, that trying to support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions policy against Israel is anti-Semitic. You hate Jews for doing what everybody else does. Greek Americans, Armenian Americans, Taiwan Americans, but when Jews do it, oh, it's bad, it's apartheid. So you can see people get emotional about these things, right? So who's right? And so what people, elected professional politicians, often say is, well, you know, that's a good point. Who's right? Well, we'll determine through the elections who is right. So I'm giving you my statement here that I basically wrote. So let me then go back to the what I'm looking for the screen for the course website, and I think I lost it, so I have to open it up again. Just a second. Oh, there it is. Okay, so we go to course website, and we go here, and so let me make sure you share the screen. So screen share. And where did it go? So hold a second here. Okay, stop share. So we go share screen, and we go here. So please vote according to whether or not you think U.S. foreign policy represents the will of the American people, because the U.S. political system, that's the black box, is democratic. And so 9 of you are neutral. One strongly disagrees, and nobody agrees. That's interesting. That's interesting. So let's go back then to the notes here, and cancel. So let me. What else do I want to highlight here in this debate and discussion? So I had something else to show you. Oh yeah, go back to the exercise, right? This to show you that's part of a news report that came up, just to show you how the impact of the U.S. Congress on foreign policy is really important, right? So this is Philip Weiss. He has a website that and a blog that reports in the Middle East, which is interesting, you know. And this is from the summertime, so it's very recent, highlighting that the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee is the umbrella organization, is an umbrella organization for the Israel lobby, right? There are a lot of different groups that are lobbying for Israel, but this one is the high-profile one. Politicians that are running for president or Congress, they will go speak at the AIPAC and National Convention every year. So it goes on here. What do I want to highlight here? So on April 26th of this year, AIPAC gave a statement about its big spending in Democratic Party primary races that set down the political rules for Democrats discussing Israel. Criticizing Israel is a red line. Don't cross that line. Haim Saban, one of the party's big donors, was there to enforce the line from the top down, because it really is all about the Benjamins, the money. Benjamin Franklin is on the $100 bill, right? So there's a reference to a Muslim member of Congress, Rashid Talibi or something. She made a comment about the Israel lobby is all about the Benjamins. And of course, she's a Muslim American representing a congressional district in U.S. Congress. She's one of the first elected Muslim Americans in the U.S. House of Representatives. And of course, she said it's all about the Benjamins regarding the Israel lobby in the United States. She was immediately attacked for playing upon traditional anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes that Jews are all about money. And she was attacked for that. So In a statement at the head of AIPAC's Super Political Action Committee, that's Political Action Committee, that's Public Affairs Committee, the United Democracy Project gave to a Jewish insider, the goal is clear. We intend to be active in a significant number of races for Congress where there's a clear difference between a candidate who supports a strong U.S.-Israel relationship and a candidate that does not, or who may seek to undermine that relationship. UDP spokesman Patrick Dorton told the insider, our goal is to help build the broadest bipartisan coalition of candidates who support the U.S.-Israel relationship. Our activist donors, who include one of the largest donors to the Democratic Party, are focused on ensuring that we have a U.S. Congress that, like President Biden, supports a vibrant and robust relationship with our democratic ally, Israel. Right, that's the claim that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. So of course, America should be allied with the only democracy in the Middle East. That largest activist donor is Haim Saban, who gave $1 million to that Super Political Action Committee, and has said, I'm a one-issue guy, and my issue is Israel. Saban has been setting the rules a long time in the Democratic Party establishment. He kept Barack Obama in line on Israel and has raised a lot of money for him. Next, he negotiated Hillary Clinton's stances on Israel in 2015 so she would keep Jewish donors. Clinton came out for Obama's Iran deal, but also issued a statement against the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign against Israel. That's BDS. Saban warned Clinton's campaign staff per leaked emails that thousands of Israel supporters needed clear signals on our Israel stance. The names of a few dozen high rollers are listed in the AIPAC Super PAC fundraising report for the last 3 months, nearly $16 million. That's a lot of money in a hurry. That's why the New York Times called Jewish donors who prioritize Israel as the elephant in the room of our foreign policy, or why a J Street panel, this is a left of center Jewish American lobby group that tries to counter AIPAC, or why a J Street panel said that a cloud of Jewish donors in the Democratic Party is gigantic and shocking. It's also the reason that Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, raises a lot of money from Saban, said that Capitol will crumble, the Congress will crumble and fall before Congress walks away from Israel. And why in 2016 and 20, again, the Democratic Party removed any references to occupation of the Palestinian occupied territories from its platform, with Joe Biden personally intervening to remove that word the last time. Just as President Barack Obama personally intervened to put the words Jerusalem is and will remain the capital of Israel into a party platform in the 2012, infuriating the Democratic base. So, and it highlights other big donors for Israel lobby, including the late Sheldon Adelson, the big casino, he died, mogul, he died recently. The squad, that includes Rashid Talibi, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, another one, I guess they're the four liberal leftist Democratic congressmen, including the one who said it's all about the Benjamins, in referring to the Israel lobby's influence over the US Congress. AIPAC shares that fear of the squad with Democratic Majority for Israel, an organization that began just 3 years ago when AIPAC had become too close to Trump's Republican Party, and then first the squad members got elected to Congress. DMFI's trademark is to pour money into a race in an urban district where a progressive candidate of color is being critical of Israel so as to support Israel-friendly candidates. Richie Torres is their poster child, the Bronx politician who recently said, I try to approach the Iran issue not from the perspective of an American, but from the perspective of an Israeli. DMFI, who is DMFI? I'm trying to remember who DMFI is here. DMFI, Democratic Majority something. Well, it just goes on here. DMFI helped defeat Nina Turner in a Cleveland primary last year for an empty seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Nina Turner was Bernie Sanders' campaign chairman when Bernie Sanders was running for the Democratic nomination in 2000, at least in 2020. He lost, of course, to Joe Biden. Turner ran again this year and got attacked repeatedly by AIPAC as an anti-Israel because she is a Sanders Democrat who has offered mild criticisms of Israel. She was roundly defeated in her May primary of this year. Turner says she is heartbroken by the defamation that she is anti-Semitic, adding some of those attacks were funded by Republican interests and even Trump donors. So that's an example of the impact of ethnic lobby groups on U.S. foreign policy because even Joe Biden is concerned about making sure that he can control, that his party hopefully maintains control over the U.S. Congress, and so that is, of course, important for understanding U.S. international policy behavior. Donald Trump withdrew. It's discussed in your book. The joint JPCOA, the Joint Policy the Iran deal was negotiated under Barack Obama, and then in 2018, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal. So that's the reference in this report to the Iran deal that is apparently not going to be removed, is not going to be renewed because the Iranians and the Americans can't agree. And I'm sure part of the reason why they can't agree to go back to the deal that Obama negotiated in 2015 is that the Israel lobby does not want that Iran nuclear deal to be accepted, doesn't want the sanctions on Iran by the United States, the economic sanctions on Iran, to be lessened or removed. And Biden is not pushing for that because we have an election coming up in a month. And then, of course, Biden is going to be concerned about the 2024 elections. You know, Barack Obama did the Iran nuclear deal in 2015 when he wasn't running for re-election. He couldn't run for re-election. Of course, he hoped that Hillary Clinton would win election in 2016, but she didn't. She lost to Donald Trump. So, all right, so let's go back to talk about the notes. So that's the impact of ethnic lobby groups, ethnic groups that belong to diasporas that share an intense identification both with the United States and Armenia, both the United States and Israel, Palestine, both the United States and Greece, for example. And they believe the people that are intensely motivated to spend their time and energy and money in these kinds of political activities, that they make themselves believe that America and Israel do not have a conflict, that Israel's interest is America's interest and America's interest is Israel's interest. And they will see a world in that all is in accord with that belief. So defending Israel against Iran is not just defending Israel, it's defending the West against Iran. And, you know, I always get a sense that the Chinese government knows this. Like the Chinese government, I think also the Russian government, they know that if they are going to deal with Iran and Israel, they have to be careful not to be targeted by the Israel lobby. They have to be careful that they avoid being targeted by the Israel lobby in the United States. And the Israel lobby is more than just Jewish Americans. It also includes right-wing evangelical Protestant Christians that believe America's biblical religious nationalist duty is to support Israel and Israel's colonization of all of the traditional historic biblical lands of Israel as in the Bible, including Judea, what they call Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. So let's go back to the notes here, and I have to find the notes, and I have too many things opened. So I already highlighted. I can close this. That way I don't have to get confused with it being open. And so, so you do mention, some of you do mention, I think Sumin Pak Sumin mentioned that domestic issues are more important for typical American voters. And that's, for typical American voters, I think that's true, right? So for example, here's a report that that was passed, something was passed a year ago. Well, hold it a second here. That typically when money is being spent, first off, yeah, I mean, lobbying the US Congress is a big business. So this is a report from a year ago, highlighting that, for example, companies spend big money hiring lobby firms, including legal attorney offices and other companies whose job it is to lobby the U.S. Congress to support their preferred policy preferences, typically focusing on domestic issues. So there are more than 4,000 lobbyists, registered lobbyists, are working on budget and spending issues in Washington, according to Open Secrets, a nonprofit watchdog group that tracks money in politics, money particularly for political campaigns. 10 major industries have spent nearly $700 million in 2001 on lobbying, the group said. That's just 10 major industries. They spent $700 million hiring people to communicate with congressmen, push congressmen, ask congressmen to support them. I mean, keep in mind, right? These Congress people, they're tremendously busy, and they rely upon these interest groups to give them an understanding of what their constituents, the people that elect them and vote for them, want on the infinite number of issues in domestic and foreign policy that confront a government and its elected officials. Right. So, you know, these congressmen, there's only 535 of them, the 100 senators plus the 435 members of the House of Representatives, you know, yet the U.S. Congress passes tens of thousands of pages of legislation every year. You know, I mean, if I don't have a book here, but tens of thousands of pages of legislation every year. Do you think that these congressmen actually read all of this? They don't even read it. It's written for them often disproportionately by these interest groups. This is what they want. This is what Congress people will adopt and modify slightly to do their jobs, while they're always thinking about getting elected and staying in office by winning the next elections. So this highlights how Joe Biden was campaigning for president on his Building Back to Get program to try to protect the environment, and it was blocked by oil and gas industry and other interests as well. And you know, this was a big issue, right? That the climate change, according to the advocates of major policy adoption, claim that we must adopt climate change legislation to shift the U.S. economy and the world economy away from fossil fuels. And Americans, your typical Americans, become very sensitive. I mean, I encounter this all the time in the U.S., right? That when you ask Americans to support spending the money necessary to move away from oil and gas and coal to reduce American greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, their response is, well, what about the Chinese? What about India? What are we going to do with them? And when you say, well, we've reached deals or commitments with the Indians and the Chinese and the European Union member states, then they of course, they always respond often to the attacks of American nationalists who say Americans should not be implementing painful, costly policies to satisfy the pressures and needs of other non-American actors, like the poor people suffering from climate change in Africa and Asia. And so American nationalism is typically evoked by these competing political entrepreneurs who are trying to defeat the current member of Congress or win their own election by often criticizing the U.S. Global obligations as a leader in international affairs by claiming that, of course, that this is sacrificing America's own immediate interests to because of some concern about the well-being of the planet. And we can't even address that because we're never going to get agreement by India and the other countries of the world to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to stop it from happening, right? So that was the position of the Trump administration, that it's basically, again, reflecting the oil and gas industry, that this is hopeless, so we should just adapt to it, rather than spend thousands of billions of dollars shifting away from oil and gas and coal to new forms of energy. This is what was adopted was, however, there were some changes that were happened. That there was a lot of criticism and attacks on the Biden administration's failure to get legislation through the Congress, despite the fact that the Democrats control the House and the Senate, and it looked like they were going to fail. That the Biden administration, despite campaigning on a commitment to build back better and reducing American greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by the end of this decade, that but then in August there was some surprising movement happen in which the U.S. Congress did agree to pass a $370 billion climate and energy programs, which they U.S. Democratic Party labeled the Inflation Reduction Act. That this is all part of an effort to reduce inflation and help Americans domestically. There were also legislation elements in this Inflation Reduction Act to increase support for medical insurance for Americans who need medical insurance to go to the hospital, but it was phrased in ways and combined with domestic legislation. Again, always the focus is trying to win the next elections. Even if we're talking about something apocalyptic like global climate change, there's always this concern to do to phrase these efforts and combine them with domestic political issues and concerns that will be more appealing to Americans. So they did finally pass a significant climate change legislation, but combined it with domestic welfare policies and medical insurance policies, and labeled it not the climate change bill. They called it the Inflation Reduction Act. And so that's typically how these things are done in a world in which most Americans, they don't pay close attention at all to domestic, to international affairs. And if they do pay attention, they pay attention to those people who say what they feel in their heart they want to hear, which includes typically disproportionately people that are not that informed of or concerned about the well-being of Pakistanis suffering from the worst flooding in memory in Pakistan as being due to global climate change, right? That's not something your typical American cares about. So we're running out of time here, and again, let me highlight some other important legislation. This was the legislation that was adopted that gave the U.S. president authorization to do whatever is necessary to fight the terrorists. This is the very controversial authorization for United States use of armed force that was adopted after September 11, 2001 attacks, that U.S. president could do whatever he thought was necessary to fight the terrorists. And so on the basis of this legislation adopted 21 years ago, that U.S. presidents have bombed Somalia, that they have bombed Pakistan, so-called terrorist bases in Yemen, all on the basis of this Authorization Act that is not a formal declaration of war, but has been interpreted by the U.S. Supreme Court as being in effect the same thing as a declaration of war, to authorize the U.S. president to use whatever means necessary to deal with the threat of terrorism, as interpreted by the president. And there's been a lot of criticism and attacks on this, but you see the reference to the War Powers Resolution, that this is not in violation of the War Powers Act, that it says, in accordance with the War Powers Resolution, which you're reading about in the chapter on the Congress, that the U.S. Congress is supposed to approve or eventually authorize the use of military force, that this authorization of use of military force is consistent with Section 8A1 of the War Powers Resolution. The U.S. Congress, it was adopted after the Vietnam War, immediately after the Vietnam War and the war in Southeast Asia. that is intended to constitute specific statutory authorization with the meaning of Section 5B of the War Powers Resolution. So the point is that the U.S. Congress typically they are hesitant to intervene and restrict the use by the president of military force because they don't want to be vulnerable to the charge that they're undermining the efforts of U.S. president to protect the American people from terrorism. So when a president engages in use of force, they know what they have a political sense of what they are able to politically undertake and not pay a political price for it domestically. So Barack Obama, for example, relied upon this to bomb Libya in 2011 to help overthrow Muammar Gaddafi without getting a U.S. congressional approval for doing that. Not to mention, I already mentioned Yemen, drone strikes in Pakistan, drone strikes in Somalia against Islamic terrorists, supposedly, whatever that is. And that's another discussion. It's short. And there's been talk about maybe this should be revoked, but they never get around to it, partly because no US president, Democrat or Republican, wants to give up power once they get it. So no US president accepts the War Powers Resolution is actually constitutional. They say, we don't agree that it actually is relevant here. Democrat and Republican have made that position. And, you know, maybe even if the Republicans take control of the US Congress, I doubt that they're going to restrict Joe Biden's ability to use force in Africa or the Middle East against the so-called terrorists. Because politically, it's not worth their time and effort, collectively speaking, in terms of their concern with their careers. Okay, that's it for today. Any questions? If not, then that's all. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.
See you Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. Bye.